Hello and welcome. I am Devika Devan and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top stories of this hour. Russian President Vladimir Putin has thanked Kim Jong Un for North Korea's help in fighting the Ukraine war, telling him that they were fighting together against modern Nazism. Meanwhile, Kim stated that Russia and North Korea should strengthen cooperation as the Kremlin denied a conspiracy with China. On Truth Social, US President Donald Trump has addressed Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong Un, warning of a conspiracy against the United States. He also honored Americans who died supporting China's victory, hoping their sacrifices are remembered. According to reports, Russia has launched 526 drones and missiles at Ukraine overnight. This comes as Kyiv and allies reject compromises. Meanwhile, Zelensky says he plans bilateral meetings in France on Wednesday evening. Donald Trump says he is monitoring the Russia-Ukraine war after 7,313 casualties last week and has expressed hope for an end. Meanwhile, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz has called Putin a major war criminal and has emphasized the need for a ceasefire. He also advocates economic measures to undermine Russia's war economy. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu praises the IDF soldiers and the reservists for their sacrifices, acknowledging the difficult decisions made during the war. He affirms Israel's successes against Hamas, the Iranian Axis, Hezbollah and Houthis, declaring the nation enters a decisive phase towards total victory. French President Macron criticizes U.S. decision to deny visas to Palestinian officials ahead of the UN meeting, calling it unacceptable. He's stressed international support for two-state solution, a ceasefire, hostage release and humanitarian aid in Gaza. Thailand's Pheu Thai party submits parliament dissolution for royal approval. Opposition backs its leader Anutin for Prime Minister's bid, who plans to hold the House vote and continue with the minority government. A bomb blast killed at least 11 people and injured 30 others at a rally in Quetta, southwestern Pakistan, commemorating nationalist leader Sardar Atullah Mengal. Authorities say it appears to be a suicide attack with investigations underway and no group claiming responsibility. Our top focus, according to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's press conference, Zelensky has arrived in Denmark. His visit comes after the Danish PM said that she will host Zelensky along with Nordic and Baltic leaders in Copenhagen. There will be discussions during the event that will focus on applying pressure on Russia and securing more military and financial support for Ukraine. Following the summit in Denmark, Zelensky has also announced his plans to travel to France for bilateral meetings with Macron this evening. Mr. Andrew Latham, Professor of International Relations, joins us on the broadcast. Mr. Latham, in your perspective, what really will be achieved by these latest rounds of meetings between Zelensky and several European leaders?
Well, I think we can speculate with some confidence what President Zelensky wants. As you just mentioned, he wants continued military aid and financial aid, and he wants a tightening of sanctions against Russia. But this is against the backdrop of fraying public support in Europe, especially western part of Europe, for the Ukraine war. It's simply dropping off the collective political radar, as it were. And Zelensky really, I think this grand tour, as it were, is motivated by a desire to put Ukraine and its war back front and center and to galvanize public support for which is expensive, for his war effort against the Russians. So I see it not as a triumph, but as an act, not quite of desperation, but something close to desperation. Things are not going well in this war for the Ukrainians and for Zelensky. And he really needs that grassroots European support beyond the Baltics and the frontline states.
Right, Mr. Nathan, stay on with us. There's some more news coming in on the same. According to reports, Kremlin has urged not to take into account Merz's opinion on a possible venue for negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. The Kremlin has said that the German Chancellor has made many unfavorable statements about President Putin in recent hours. The Kremlin has also addressed comments from US President Donald Trump, who alleged a conspiracy between Russia, China, and North Korea. Reports said that Kremlin stated that Russia's interactions with China and North Korea is for the benefit of their respective countries and not directed against anyone. The Kremlin further insisted that no one is plotting anything. Mr. Latham, once again, from your perspective, where exactly are we headed as far as these latest developments are concerned? Because more commentary is coming in from the United States of America in light of the recent military day parades that were hosted by China, which saw North Korea's leader as well as Vladimir Putin in attendance.
Yes, that's the first time those three leaders have been in the same place at the same time ever. That really is a kind of breakthrough. China's military parade commemorating what it perceives as its victory over Japan in the Second World War, minimizing the role of the United States and Britain and the Commonwealth, etc. India as well, by the way. Also an opportunity to parade the latest and greatest military kit, everything from unmanned combat vehicles to intercontinental ballistic missiles. It's quite an impressive display of Chinese military might, and also quite an interesting display of their attempt to partially rewrite the history of the Second World War. And we've seen that on the Russian side in the past few years as well. They beat the Germans, not the Western allies. I think, though, that if we look at this Russian outreach to North Korea, it too smacks of desperation. North Korea is a pariah state. It is the ultimate pariah state. It is totally isolated internationally, with the exception of, big exceptions, Russia and China. But for Russia to double down on its relationship suggests to me that there's nowhere else to go. Looking for expendable manpower, looking for replacement kit, looking for ammunition, North Korea is a good place to go. But in terms of redoubling its diplomatic clout on the world stage, North Korea has nothing to offer whatsoever. So again, both Zelensky, I think, and Putin, to some extent, are acting out of desperation because the war, ironically and weirdly, is not going well for either of them. I think on balance, going better for Russia, but not going well enough for Russia.
Okay, interesting. But at the same time, Ms. Latham, I do want to understand from your perspective, as far as this latest development regarding Germany is also concerned, do you think some of the commentary that's coming out of Europe will make it difficult for Donald Trump to continue his talks with Russia?
I think there's a divide between the political elite in Western Europe, the Merzes and Starmers and Macrons of this world, and your average person in the street, as it were. I don't think that they see eye to eye. Merz in particular now has become galvanized. With respect to the American angle, I think the Trump administration would love it if the Europeans actually stepped up. That would allow the United States to step down its commitment and to continue its pivot to the Indo-Pacific, because it sees China as a bigger challenge, if not a bigger threat, than it sees Russia. So to the extent that the European leaders and President Zelensky are able to galvanize more grassroots support, which then will free them up to invest in military equipment and ammunition and in tightening up the sanctions, which will hurt, by the way, Western Europe in terms of the price of gas, for example. I think Donald Trump will be pleased by that. Whether those European leaders and President Zelensky can pull this off is another question, but I think Donald Trump's sense of American interests are clear. The less the United States has to do with this war in Europe, the more the Europeans can deal with it, the more it frees up America to pursue other elements of its grand strategy.
Absolutely. Mr. Latham, stay on with us. More news coming in on that front. In a significant show of unity, North Korean leader Kim Jong Un and Russian President Vladimir Putin have met in Beijing on Wednesday, pledging to strengthen their alliance amid global isolation. The meeting took place on the sidelines of a military parade celebrating the anniversary of Japan's formal surrender in the Second World War, where the two leaders were also joined by Chinese President Xi Jinping. During their private bilateral discussions, Kim Jong Un offered his full support to the Russian leader. In a rare public acknowledgement, President Putin thanked North Korea's special forces who were deployed to aid Russian troops in the conflict against Ukraine. The meeting between the two leaders, whose countries are bound by a mutual defense treaty and face heavy international sanctions, lasted for over an hour. At the conclusion of their talks, President Putin extended an invitation for Kim Jong Un to visit Russia, signaling a deepening of ties between the two nations. The Kremlin stated that Putin thanked Kim for North Korea's military assistance in the conflict with Ukraine, claiming the two nations are united in a fight against modern Nazism. The meeting's close nature was highlighted by the fact that the two leaders traveled together in the same car. In response to criticism from President Donald Trump, who suggested a conspiracy amongst the three leaders, the Kremlin denied any such plotting. A Kremlin aide suggested Trump's remarks might have been ironic. Listening to what the senior Kremlin aide and foreign policy advisor had to say.
Президент Трамп, я надеюсь, не без иронии сказал, что, мол, он передает приветы председателю Си Цзиньпиню и просит через него тоже наилучшие дружеские пожелания передать президенту Путину и председателю государственных дел КНДР, соответственно. И он, опять-таки, я думаю, не без иронии сказал, что вот якобы эти трое готовят заговор против Соединенных Штатов. Вот я хочу сказать, что никакие заговоры никто не устраивал, никто ничего не плел, никаких заговоров. Более того, в мысли даже этого ни у кого не было, ни у кого из этих троих лидеров не было. Кроме того, могу сказать, что все понимают, какую роль играют Соединенные Штаты, нынешняя администрация президента Трампа и лично президент Трамп в нынешних международных раскладах.
Mr. Andrew Latham, Professor of International Relations, joins us back on the broadcast. Mr. Latham, I have to understand from you, what do you make of America's latest, would you call it insecurity, when the president says that there's a conspiracy being hatched in China because he's seen the three leaders together for the first time? We've also seen Donald Trump in the past making attempts to generate or build a relationship with the North Korean leader. But of course, there's no denying that North Korea and Russia share a very special relationship. So is this simply an insecurity, and how do you see this now playing out?
Well, it's possibly an insecurity. The last thing in the world I ever want to do is try to psychoanalyze President Trump. But if I look at the interests at play, what I see is Russia and North Korea and China pursuing their respective national interests, which are aligned. They're aligned. And so they're on the same side, on the same team. And Donald Trump looks at this from the outside and says, but I visited Pyongyang. I didn't go to Pyongyang, but I visited with Kim. And I thought we were friends. And so he's personalized it. He lacks the language, as it were, the diplomatic language, the geopolitical language to understand and to frame it as this is simply three countries that have shared interests coming together to pursue and defend those interests, and not taking America into consideration, and certainly not including it in and not including Donald Trump in the conversation. He takes umbrage at that. If that's insecurity, then I guess that's insecurity, but I think he simply lacks the geopolitical vocabulary to wrap his head around what's going on.
Absolutely. Mr. Andrew Latham, thank you so much for joining us on NewsX World with that perspective. We leave it there. In other news, Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez has called Europe's response to the war in Gaza a failure, warning that Western double standards on Gaza and Ukraine can potentially risk undermining EU's global credibility. In a recent interview ahead of talks with UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, Sanchez said the EU remains divided on how to influence Israel and that the world has now started questioning Europe's more moral consistency. The Spanish PM also described Israel's assault on Gaza as one of the darkest episodes of the 21st century international relations and urged the EU to suspend its strategic partnership with Tel Aviv. Sanchez, who was the first senior European official to accuse Israel of genocide, has also pressed Europe to act more decisively, including through its financial measures. These remarks come as Sanchez seeks to reassert his international standing while facing corruption allegations at home. Joining us on the broadcast is Mr. Dan Perry, World Affairs Analyst from Tel Aviv. Mr. Perry, I have to understand from you, what do you make of the latest comments by the Spanish Prime Minister, who says that the EU has failed in its duty to put any sort of pressure on Israel to end the war, and that there is a much greater focus that the world is placing on the Russia-Ukraine war?
You know, I personally think the war in Gaza should end and should have ended some time ago, and that there are other ways to achieve Israel's understandable goals of removing Hamas from power in an area on their border from which they were attacked and getting back their hostages. There is a legitimate debate to be had there. And in fact, most of the Israeli public would join Prime Minister Sanchez in wishing there were an end to the war. The government's insistence on escalating and continuing is quite unpopular in Israel. That said, I'm not so impressed with his framing of this issue. To compare Israel's desire to rid itself and the Palestinians of a jihadist mafia that started this war by massacring 1,200 people in Israel to Russia's attack on Ukraine, which was completely unprovoked, utterly inadmissible, and cannot be defended on any level whatsoever, is absurd. And part of Europe's problem with Israel is that they lose credibility when its leaders make such comparisons that are, frankly, to my mind, as someone who led AP coverage in both Europe and the Middle East, outrageous. Now, of course, it's true that to the extent that Europe wants the war to end, it has failed to compel Israel to do that. And indeed, Europe has not used every lever at its disposal. Specifically, Israel remains an associate member of the European Union. So there are things Europe can do that they haven't done yet. But frankly, if Europe wants the war to end, what they really should do is figure out a better plan. Help Israel figure out a better plan to dislodge Hamas from Gaza. That is currently a global consensus that is backed by NATO, the European Union, North America, US, and the Arab League that 6 weeks ago called on Hamas to disarm. The one sure way to end the war in Gaza is for Hamas to surrender and agree to disarm. There's really no debating that point. And, you know, people who call on the war to end, as I do, are beholden to actually come up with a better plan to achieve that end, which must be achieved. And I repeat, most of all, that would be a failure to a favor to the Palestinians, who are tormented and oppressed by Hamas that has brought tremendous catastrophe upon them by launching a war that they cannot win. So I think Sanchez, with respect,
all right, Mr. Perry, thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast with that perspective. We leave it there. Meanwhile, German Foreign Minister Johann Wadephul, who is on a visit to New Delhi, has held a bilateral meeting with Indian External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar. The talks between both leaders extended to all facets of the bilateral relations, ranging from trade to geopolitics and the possible challenges that both the countries face. Talking on India's efforts of peace in Ukraine, German FM also hailed Prime Minister Narendra Modi's conversation with President Putin during the SCO for a speedy peace. He said that peace in Ukraine is essential for both India and Germany. Indian Foreign Minister Dr. Jaishankar talked about free trade negotiations with the European Union. Meanwhile, Dr. Jaishankar also pointed out that FTA negotiations with the EU predate the tariff situation that has arisen this year. Listen in to what both leaders had to say.
Economically, you already mentioned the FTA. Germany is a full supporter of getting this agreement negotiated as soon as even possible. We are a free trade nation.
to deepen our relationship with the European Union and expedite the FTA negotiations. India and Germany have a strong history of multilateral cooperation, which I'm confident will be further advanced through our talks today.
Mr. Martin Irais, foreign affairs expert, joins us from Germany. Mr. Irais, I have to understand from you, how exactly is this visit of the German foreign minister being perceived in Germany, and how critical are the conversations with India for Germany at this point in time?
I think right now the current government of Germany is trying to find new partners due to this current situation where they want to stop being economically and even bellically dependent on the U.S. or their allies that have been historically clear. But right now, Germany is trying to find a new path to open their economy now that they have a huge challenge with the Chinese. These years have been a catastrophe for the German economy in terms of the way that they sold, for example, their cars, their medicines, because of the challenge of that China represents. Right now, we're seeing two countries that are very identical in their the products that they export. India and Germany, both countries are known for having a huge market of medicine. And I think this is a natural partnership between India and Germany that will strengthen both parties' economy. And I think this is a very positive move.
All right, Mr. Irais, thank you so much for joining us on NewsX World. With that, we move on to some other news. Thailand's political crisis has deepened further since Prime Minister Paetongtarn Shinawatra was ousted by the Constitutional Court last week over ethics breach. The ruling party, Pheu Thai, has won 5 out of the last 6 elections, but has been struggling to hold on to an alliance. On the contrary, the opposition parties are coming together. The Bumje Thai party leader, Anutin Charnvirakul, has held a press conference in Bangkok after securing backing from the opposition People's Party to serve as Thailand's next Prime Minister. The Bumje Thai party have broken its alliance from the ruling Pheu Thai in June this year and is now engaged in securing a deal with other parties. The endorsement from People's Party is conditional on dissolving the parliament within 4 months. People's Party leaders have talked about supporting the government from outside without being a part of it. Meanwhile, the ruling party is pushing for snap elections to thwart the rival's prime ministerial bid. The Bumje Thai party leader, Anutin, has appreciated People's Party cooperation to fill the political vacuum created by the Thailand political crisis. Listen in.
ขอบคุณพรรคประชาชนคณะกรรมการบริหารของพรรคประชาชนสมาชิกสภาผู้แทนราษฎรของพรรคประชาชนเจ้าหน้าที่พนักงานและผู้ และพี่น้องประชาชนผู้สนับสนุนพรรคประชาชนทุกท่านที่ได้มีมติของที่ประชุมกรรมการบริหารพรรคประชาชนในการให้การสนับสนุนพรรคภูมิใจไทยเป็นแกนนำในการจัดตั้งรัฐบาลในครั้งนี้
วันนี้คณะกรรมการบริหารของพรรคจึงได้ประชุมและมีมติว่าหากมีการประชุมสภาผู้แทนราษฎรเพื่อให้ความเห็นชอบเลือกนายกรัฐมนตรีคนใหม่พรรคประชาชนจะให้ความเห็นชอบแก่คุณอนุทินชาญวีรกูลหัวหน้าพรรค
Dr. Suturu Nagao, fellow at the Hudson Institute, joins us on this development. Dr. Nagao, what do you make of the current political crisis in Thailand, and where do you see this heading?
Yes, there is a high possibility that the new prime minister supported by the opposition party will choose the election. So that's why which party will dominate in the parliament and which party it will be the Prime Minister rely on this election. Indeed, in the Thailand, there are several parties, but simply said, two-party fight for a long time. And that's why in the local area, the current previous Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez, supported by the other Thaksin group, and the Thaksin group is very strong in the local area. But the city area is completely opposite. So that's why in the elections, half and half. But indeed, Thaksin is not good, has a not good relation with the military. So army do not like, and this time Pedro Sánchez and army relation has reflected the negotiation with the Cambodia. That was the reason this resignation of the prime minister has happened, and it was starting point of this conflict. So that's why the view from this situation in the election, of course, this time the opposition party has the advantage. So that's why the Thaksin group will lose their power, I guess, I think.
All right, Dr. Nagao, stay on with us as we shift our focus from Thailand to Indonesia, where in the capital, Jakarta, hundreds of women dressed in pink joined the anti-government protests and marched to the parliament. Carrying brooms as a symbol to sweep away the state corruption and repression, the women demanded reform and an end to police brutality. Listen in.
Kemarahan sebagai perempuan karena berbagai kebijakan pemerintah dan juga DPR saat ini justru bertentangan dengan upaya untuk memperbaiki kehidupan, namun justru menjerumuskan rakyat ke dalam ketiadaan lapangan pekerjaan, kemudian juga kekerasan serta diskriminasi. Kami mau bilang bahwa protes itu adalah hak kami. Protes adalah hak kami sebagai rakyat. Jadi biarkan rakyat untuk protes dengan aman tanpa kekerasan. Untuk DPR sendiri sebenarnya kami sudah cukup muak dengan yang saat ini dilakukan oleh DPR ya. Jadi kami mau bilang bahwa DPR harus tahu diri begitu. Karena seharusnya DPR itu adalah mewakili atau menggunakan aspirasi rakyat sebagai landasan pengambilan kebijakan begitu. Jadi tahu diri aja deh DPR.
Perempuan berada di jantung perjuangan, tapi suara kami tidak dengarkan. Salah satu yang patut kemudian dipertimbangkan dilakukan oleh negara adalah partisipasi bermakna dari perempuan. Bagaimana negara punya kewajiban untuk menghargai, menghormati, memenuhi, mempromosikan hak asasi manusia dan hak-hak perempuan. Tapi negara abai melakukan itu.
Amid the ongoing protests, rights groups say that at least 10 people have died since the unrest began last week after a police vehicle fatally struck a motorcycle taxi driver. President Prabowo Subianto is attending a military parade in China, but has vowed security forces will stand firm and has called parts of the unrest signs of terrorism and treason. The protests, now spreading nationwide, have drawn scrutiny from both Indonesia's Human Rights Commission and the United Nations. Dr. Saturo Nagao with us. Dr. Nagao, your quick take on the protests in Indonesia.
In this case, there is no place the people complain. That is a very important point. Because current President Prabowo is the successor of the former President Joko. So in total, more than nearly 11 years, the same government has continued. So, and during the process, there is mood and roots. It is not easy to say complaints, some expert pointed out in the Indonesian politics. So that's why under such kind of situation, the people want to express their complaints through a little bit more violent one. And so under the Indonesia is still a democratic country, but compared with the past, a little bit authoritarian type, the people pointed out. Under this demonstration is not just a peaceful one that has happened recently. So that's why too long same government faces a little bit difficulty is common, and Indonesia's case is like that, I think. And why this has happened? Because when the new government swore in, that time the people compare with the current new government and the old government. In this case, old government failure and new government easy to success, it has happened. But after this new government continue for a long time, people try to compare the same government, but in the past they achieved, now they do not achieve. Something like that. They need to compete with themselves in the past. Same leader, but in the past they have done well. In this case, current leader, which is the same person, face a problem. That kind of things could happen. So that's why the long term is more difficult for leader to continue.
Yes.
That has happened in Indonesia, I think.
Absolutely. Dr. Nagao, thank you so much for joining us on NewsX World with that perspective. That's all that we have time for. Stay tuned for more news on the other side.